Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a highly polarized topic, and yeah, you guessed it is AI art. But we aren't going to sit here and rehash the usual debates about copyright or artistic style. Instead, we are looking at its environmental impact. And I've got to tell you, when I first saw the data we're exploring today, it completely flipped my assumptions upside down. So let's dig into this together. Here is the big question. What actually happens when we measure the carbon footprint of art from end to end? We're talking about putting physical, hand-painted art and generative AI art side by side to really find out. But before we get to the hard numbers, we kind of need to understand the psychological landscape we're stepping into. All right, Section 1, the AI art divide, understanding public sentiment. So looking at the macro data from Pew Research and YouGov, it reveals a massive, undeniable split. On one side, you've got 10% of people who absolutely love AI art. These are your power users, right? And another 25% totally accept it for casual use. But man, the contrast is stark. You have 30% who dislike or are really wary of it, and a full 20% of the public who harbor a literal veins-popping-out level of hatred towards AI visuals. These are people deeply opposed on principle, often driven by very real fears over deepfakes and the threat to artists' livelihoods. It's just a remarkably tense environment out there. And because of all that tension, people really want to know exactly what they're looking at. According to the data, a massive 76% of Americans demand transparency. They say it is extremely or very important to them to know definitively if an image was made by a human or if it was generated by artificial intelligence. And here's the underlying anxiety driving that demand. A majority of adults, 53%, actually believe generative AI will ultimately worsen human creativity. Only a tiny fraction think it's going to improve it. This widespread skepticism is absolutely crucial to keep in mind because it completely alters how we view art in the real world. Moving on to Section 2, the AI label penalty, or as we like to call it, the case of the cozy cats. Okay, picture this. Imagine a cozy folk art image. We've got two contented cats lounging in Adirondack chairs, sipping coffee, surrounded by sunflowers. Now, when we show this completely unlabeled to 10,000 people, 55% of viewers experience pure charm and delight. Another 15% actively appreciate the artistic craft of it. Only 10% are technical skeptics hunting for algorithmic quirks. But the second we slap the label created by AI onto that exact same image, the charm plummets to 40%. 20% instantly devalue the image, feeling like it's just lost its magic, and most shockingly, a full 15% of the audience shifts into active rejection. They instantly downvote it on principle alone. So what actually shifts in our minds when we see that AI label? Well, three major psychological changes occur almost instantly. First up, there is a value penalty. Second, viewers enter this state of hyper-scrutiny. Suddenly they're zooming in, hunting for microscopic glitches in the flower petals that they would have completely ignored 5 seconds earlier. And third, we see a polarization of the extremes. The whole neutral middle ground just evaporates, and a pleasant, simple painting of some cats is instantly turned into a proxy war about technology and the future of human effort. The really crucial point here is this value penalty. Without the label, people view the image as craft art. Something worth paying for as a canvas print or maybe a jigsaw puzzle. But once it's labeled AI, the perceived lack of human hours instantly strips away the financial value viewers are willing to assign to the work. Because it wasn't painted by hand over weeks and weeks, the expectation suddenly shifts to assuming the artwork should be cheap, if not entirely free. Which brings us to Section 3, the carbon footprint showdown, digital inference versus physical creation. Imagine we set up a physical gallery displaying a beautifully framed AI image right next to a hand-painted watercolor piece, complete with plaques showing their end-to-end carbon footprints. To get these numbers, researchers use a life cycle analysis. This means calculating the emissions from literally start to finish. For the human artist, it includes living emissions, food, heating, keeping the lights on in the workspace, plus manufacturing the actual canvas and paints. For the AI, it's the data center energy used for digital inference. And for both pieces, we have to calculate the transportation required to actually get the art to the gallery. Now, the reality of this data is absolutely wild. Generating a high-resolution AI image at a data center costs just 2 to 5 grams of carbon. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the equivalent of charging your smartphone just one time. Conversely, a human artist's living emissions and the manufacturing of physical materials cost anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 grams of carbon. But here is the real kicker. Putting either of these framed pieces into a gas-powered delivery van for a simple 10-mile round trip to the gallery adds a massive flat baseline of 4,000 grams of carbon.
Section 4, when delivery dominates everything, the audience reaction to the hard data.
Presenting this unarguable hard data right next to the art pretty much shatters audience assumptions. 35% of the gallery audience experiences severe cognitive dissonance. I mean, they've heard all the mainstream narratives about power-hungry AI data centers, so they are completely shocked that a short van trip just wipes out any digital energy concerns. Then you've got 30% who feel an ethical disconnect, arguing it's just unfair to count a human artist's heating and food as art emissions. 25% take a much more practical view of the math, and 10% are your hardliners whose stances remain completely unfazed, regardless of what the numbers say. For that practical 25%, though, the math is just undeniable. The fossil fuel delivery vehicle accounts for 80% to 95%, or sometimes even more, of the total carbon footprint for both pieces of physical art. Think about that. The transport of the art makes the actual method of creation, whether it was made by human hands or computer algorithms, almost entirely irrelevant from an environmental standpoint. Finally, Section 5, redefining true artistic value, the bottom line. Impartially speaking, this data completely strips away the environmental high ground argument from the whole physical gallery debate. Critics of generative AI have leaned really heavily on the narrative of massive carbon footprints to dismiss AI art. But because the physical materials, the framing, the glass production, and especially that gas-powered transport massively dwarf the digital inference costs, well, the carbon footprint argument simply doesn't hold up as a differentiator in physical spaces anymore. Which leaves us with this final really provocative question. Now that the environmental myth in physical art displays has been totally busted by life cycle data, we're forced back to a much deeper philosophical question. Do we value art intrinsically for the invisible human hand and the hours of struggle behind it, or do we value it simply for the emotions it evokes and how beautiful it looks hanging on the wall? It's a complex question for sure, and one that's definitely going to keep evolving. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this data has given you a whole new lens to view the art world through.